Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first PBALC author live stream of the year. We are so excited to welcome our first guest author, Johanna Vann. You are our first author live stream, Johanna.
Yeah, I'm so excited. That's awesome.
Yes, and I know that this interview has been highly anticipated because we've been getting a lot of comments and a lot of likes and things like that. And so, unfortunately, because due to some personal issues, we had to postpone it for today, but it's going to be a good one. So, excited to have you here. And so, why don't we just go ahead and get right into it?
Love it. Let's do it.
So, as we always ask our authors to introduce yourself and then tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me. My name is Johanna, and I live right outside Nashville, Tennessee with my family. I have two little kids, two toddlers. They're 3 years old and 1.5. So I'm a busy stay-at-home mom, but I also love to write. I've always been a writer ever since I was really young. I studied journalism and have been writing my entire career. But this was my first time doing something completely different in writing. I've never written fiction before writing this book. So I took a chance when I had my first baby. I decided I had this beautiful story about my mom's journey coming to America that I really wanted to share with the world. And so I decided to just try it out, and I wrote it into a book. And I remember telling myself, it's okay if this never gets published. It'll be for my family, for my kids. But I'm so grateful that today it is an actual book.
Yes. Yes, it was a wonderful read for myself. And it was surprising to me as well that the grandma's name in the book, and I think your grandma as well, her name is Alba. And so I was like, oh, you don't hear that name very often.
No, you
So
don't.
it's great to see that name in the book.
I love that, yes.
Well, as you know, Permian Basin Adult Literacy Center, our primary focus is adult literacy. So why is literacy, in adult literacy in particular, an important topic for you as an author?
Yes, obviously, I love to read. You know, every writer is a reader. So, and I've been reading my whole life. My mother, even as an immigrant with very little English when I was a little girl, would spend time reading with us, would read to us as we went to bed. And so it's always been an important part of my life. And I think as an adult today, what books bring to my life is they just open my world so much. There's so much that I can learn about that I wouldn't if I didn't read books, because I live in one small part of the country. You know, I wouldn't have as much exposure to the rest of the world, other cultures, other thoughts, other people think and how they live. And so even fiction, you know, fiction might be made up stories, but there's so much that we can learn. And that's really what I wanted for my book. Like, I wanted people to learn about Colombian heritage, and I wanted people to learn about what it's like to be a child in America who grows up with parents who aren't from America. And what is it like for adults to come to America for the first time? So even though it's a fictional story, there's so much that you can learn about other people, and that's really what I love about reading and why literacy is so important.
Yes. And I know in the book, not to give a lot away, but in the book, I know Melanie is the main character in the book, and her mother, when she came to the United States, attended ELL classes at a small literacy center in New York. And I was like, oh man, I loved reading about that. So,
and that's her story. That was my mom's experience when she came to Colombia, because she was in her early 20s, so she really didn't have a lot of English exposure. Didn't speak English well at all, and so she did. Thankfully, in New York City, they had, and I'm sure they still do have, free classes to teach you and help you acclimate and learn English. So she was really, really just blessed by that organization.
Yes. And so we always try to emphasize to people that, English acquisition or language acquisition is literacy as well. So that's an important part of literacy. So as you mentioned that, writing has always been something that you're passionate about. And so it wasn't something that you developed an interest over time. It was just something that that was like ingrained in you, right?
Yes, and I think it has a lot to do with all of the books that I was surrounded with, even as a child. I just always loved books. I was always attracted to stories and just language. And so I think it was very natural for me to grow up and continue to be attracted to that and continue to want to explore that and learn how to do it myself.
Yeah, and I know this book in particular, American Immigrant, is kind of based on your mother's story, but so it was easier for you to develop your characters. But I don't know if you have another book in the works or anything like that, but how do you develop your characters?
Yeah, so I do often when I'm writing books, even I am working on a new book right now, and as I'm writing these characters, I do think about people that I've met or people that I know, people that I love in my life. And I kind of build a character around them sometimes. And it's
Mhm.
not always that, this character is all my mom or this character is all me, but there are a lot of parts of that person live in that character. And I kind of bring that to life in a different way. And so yeah, I think it is fun to think about, like one of the characters in my next book is a reflection of my husband. And so it's fun to think about this is something that I know my husband would say, so I'm going to put this in the book. Or, if my husband were in this situation, he would probably react this way. So that's kind of how the character reacts. So again, it's not always like, so many people have asked me, how much of this book is your life? Like how much of Melanie is you? And
Uh-huh.
there's a lot of Melanie that is me, and a lot of her feelings are my feelings and things that I felt and thought. But there's also, it's also a story and it's fiction, so I get to be creative and kind of liven it up a little bit or cause more drama. And so it's not
Hmm.
100% me, but it is a lot. So it's really fun to do that. But I would never, I would never do it in like a negative way. Where it's like, can you put this negative trait that I
Yeah.
think that would be abusive. But it is fun when you think about people you love, like how can I bring out these beautiful qualities that they have in this character? So
Yeah.
that's a really fun part about writing.
And I don't know if you do this, but whenever I finish a book, I always look at the author's,
Oh
photo,
yeah,
and I'm like, oh my gosh, because I was imagining
yes,
Melanie. I'm like, oh man, that's not how I imagined Melanie to look like you, and things like that. Or if the story was really kind of weird, and I'm like, how did this author? Because they're like very professional looking. I'm like, how did this author come up with these crazy ideas?
your imagination can go wild. I love it. Yeah.
Yes. So tell our viewers a little bit more about the book, The American Immigrant.
Yeah. So this book, I really wanted to share two stories. I wanted to share the story of the immigrant who comes to America when they're older, because my mother
Mhm.
came when she was in her early 20s by herself. And so I wanted to share that story, that experience of what it's like to move to a foreign country, not speak the language, know very little people. My mom's two sisters were here, so she did know somebody, but other than that, you don't know anybody. You're starting
Mhm.
from absolutely nothing, zero money to your name. And so I wanted to share that story of what it's like to do that and what even the journey coming here is like.
Mhm.
And then I also wanted to share the story of the child who is born to the immigrant that comes to this country, because
Mhm.
I don't think there are a lot of stories out there who kind of share that second generation immigrant experience. And I think it's a really unique experience. And I didn't really realize how unique it was until I married my husband, and I would share stories with him of my childhood. And he would say, that's so crazy. Like you should write that. You should tell people that. And
Yeah.
I would think, oh, I didn't know that was that weird or that different. And even little things like the movies that I've never seen or the books I've never read or the things I'm not aware of because my parents didn't, bring those into our household because they didn't know about it. And so in this book, I really wanted to share simultaneously both of those stories so that people could kind of see what it's like to grow up in that environment. Because I think it is
Mhm.
really, especially in different parts of the country, you don't see a lot of immigrants. You don't even sometimes know that someone is the child of an immigrant, in your workplace or at your school.
Yeah.
So anyway, once I wanted to write my mom's story, which you find in her firsthand account, the character that kind of was inspired by my mom. And then I tell the story of the daughter in the book, learning about her mother's journey, learning about what it was like when she was a child in Colombia, and then what life was like when she was a young adult in New York City as an immigrant, what it was like to raise children, who
Mhm.
didn't speak your first language, what it was like to kind of acclimate to different cultural practices when your children are like growing up very American, but you are not
Yeah.
very American.
Yeah.
So an American immigrant is basically the journey of a young woman who was kind of frustrated by the fact that she and her mother can never really connect that well because they come from two cultural backgrounds. And what it's like when she gets to Colombia, she meets her extended family, she sees her grandmother after 10 or 15 years, and then she kind of learns through journals that she finds about what her mother's life was like when her mother was young, and she learns about all these stories that she never knew about, and kind of grows an empathy for her mom, in a way that she's never been able to because she didn't know about these stories. And so the end of the book is just kind of them, experiencing a new relationship and her becoming a different kind of writer because now she feels that she's a different person now that she knows her culture better, her mother better, and she appreciates those things about herself.
Yeah, she can empathize with her mom a little bit more. Well, can you read us a selection
Yes.
from your book for our viewers?
I would love to. And this selection is featuring Melanie, who's the protagonist, and her grandmother, who's also named Alba, which I love. My grandmother's name was Alba, and so I decided to name the grandmother that as well in this book. Okay, so it says, Melanie smiled at her grandmother, amazed at all she did at her age. She worked her store, kept the community well fed, taught sewing classes to young women, and who knows what else. And yet she never looked tired. Her mother, on the other hand, had hardly smiled or spoken for most of the meal. When everyone had finished eating, Anita stood and quickly packed away all the food before retreating to her room with a journal tucked underneath her arm. Melanie rested her chin on her fist and watched her walk away with the one thing that had helped her understand herself better than anything else had. Is she mad at me? Hurt? Disappointed? Will she ever let me read that journal again? Why don't you accompany me to the pharmacy? I need to pick up my medicines, Alba said to Melanie, bringing her attention back to the kitchen. When Alba rejected Juan Carlos's offer to stop at the pharmacy for her on his way home from work, Melanie was sure her grandmother had more in mind than just a walk down the street. She must have noticed the stormy cloud that had appeared over Anita at the breakfast table. They followed a similar path Melanie had walked the day before with her mother, but this time she was too preoccupied with what her grandmother wanted to talk about to worry about the fractured roads. Is everything okay between you and your mom? Nothing got past her grandmother, no matter how old she got. Yeah, I think so. Melanie contemplated how much to say. She didn't want to tell her about reading her mother's journal without her permission, but then again, her grandmother might be able to help her fill gaps in the stories where her mother might not. Abuela, I found my mom's old journal in the nightstand. I know I shouldn't have read it without asking her first, but I got sucked in and couldn't stop. It's absorbing. Alba mouthed, oh. Mom found out right before breakfast. I guess that's why she was acting weird at the table. She said she didn't mind that I had read some of the entries, so maybe it was just remembering these stories that put her in a pensive mood. I'm not sure. All I know is that she didn't want to talk about it. Alba pursed her lips and narrowed her eyes, and Melanie knew by her facial expression exactly what she wanted to say. I know. I shouldn't have read as much as I did, but like I said, I got sucked in. I've never heard any of those stories, Abuela, and it's kind of embarrassing. I feel like I don't know my own mother at all. Melanie hadn't noticed that her speech had quickened until all the words had spewed out of her mouth in Spanish with little effort. Was being in her ancestors' country all she needed to get comfortable with the language? Well, did you ever ask your mother about her upbringing, about her life here in Colombia? The answer was obvious. All morning, she'd already been contemplating doing that. I know where you're going with this, Melanie said. Listen, I know I didn't get a front row seat to your and your mother's relationship, but from what I've heard, you've never been easy on her. Melanie's cheeks felt warm. She hated to disappoint her grandmother, her sweet, silly, and joy-filled grandmother. She didn't like the pit growing in her stomach, but she also couldn't deny the truth behind her grandmother's words. Mija, you can't possibly imagine the life your mother lived in my home. There's so much I feel responsible for, so much I regret. But by the grace of God, we worked through it all and sought and found forgiveness that has allowed both of us to live in a place of peace. And maybe that's why she never brought up the topic, why she never talked about her upbringing. But sometimes I wish she had. Something changes in us when we know the road someone has walked. It often turns resentment into empathy, which allows for harmony. And I think that's something you and your mother have always been missing. Melanie nodded, looked down at her feet. There were still no words to offer in response. Everything her grandmother had said was true. Melanie could understand her mother better because she now knew the road she'd walked. Could it be possible then to turn all of those years of resentment and rejection into harmony, just as her grandmother had said? You're right, Abuela. Knowing about her journey, I think would have helped me be less frustrated, always feeling like my mom didn't understand me. No matter how hard I tried, I could never explain clearly enough to make her understand what I needed or what I wanted. If I'd known, maybe I would have had more compassion for why that was the case. Alba put her index finger in the air before strolling over to a walk-up window outside the neighborhood pharmacy. She didn't have to give her name. The pharmacist knew exactly who Alba was. Gripping a small white paper bag, Alba picked up the conversation where she left off. I don't think you know how much your mother felt that too. She has never wanted anything more than to see you and your siblings thrive. She's done back-breaking work her entire life just to see that through. And look at you. She reached out and grabbed Melanie's hand. Melanie looked up to meet her grandmother's eyes. You went to college and got the job of your dreams, the job of our dreams. Everything she worked for truly paid off. I know it was hard for you to grow up in a different culture than your mother's and try to find your place there, but look at everything that was possible because of what she did. Don't gloss over that simply because your life wasn't like everyone else's in America. Melanie looked back down at her feet. All these years, she'd only ever considered how difficult it had been for her to have parents who were immigrants. Never once did she consider how difficult it must have been for her mother to feel like she couldn't connect with her own children, to feel like her children were born in a foreign place and spoke a foreign language that, even after more than 30 years in the country, she never quite learned how to master. Alba released Melanie's hand and reached her arm across her shoulder to pull her in close. I don't say any of this to make you feel bad, mi amor. I say this because sometimes it's difficult to see the world from someone else's point of view. But if we ever get the chance to catch even a glimpse from their shoes, it can change not just how we see them, but how we see the world.
That's a lovely passage, Johanna. What do you hope the biggest takeaway that you want people, biggest takeaway from this story from your readers of the book?
Yeah, I thought a lot about this when I was writing the book, and I think what it comes down to is I want people to be curious about where they come from, about their family stories, because I think it's really easy to go about in life never once thinking about, like Melanie in the book, never once thinking about what it was like for our parents when they were children, or our grandparents when they were children and young adults. What was it like when they were newly married and had young children at home? And what was it like when they moved from one state to another or one country to another? And I think it's important to ask questions about those stories because, again, like Melanie in the book, you learn so much more about yourself. And it's not just about yourself, but as you ask questions and learn about your family origins and your family stories, you become empathetic. You realize, oh, that's why my father was like this, or that's why my grandfather always did this. And so you become empathetic to their life, their situation. You learn more about yourself, and it's something that you can pass on to your children so that these family origin stories never go away because they're important to our culture. So learning about all of the stories in my family really, really lit a fire in me to teach my children Spanish, to introduce them to Colombian foods, to want to take them to Colombia, to want them to be around my parents as much as possible, to be around that Colombian culture. And so I think it just can impact your life in so many ways.
And I think too, it's important to talk about these things too, to eliminate biases and misconceptions, right? Because I love how you also in the book there was, you talked about Melanie's mother in the book was very passionate about Colombia. She loved Colombia, and so she disliked how there was so much discrimination against Colombians in Colombia, and I wanted to kind of read a little passage here that I had bookmarked because it just was very. It spoke to why people shouldn't, learn about other countries too, and learn about other cultures before they, to keep these biases away. Is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. And it's a passage from, it's page 184, and it says, it was when Melanie's mother was taking classes, and she was talking to the professor, and she said, sometimes, I said, I had no idea. Your English is so good. I just figured you were American. So sometimes I forget too. I was 5 when they brought me here, and that was the professor speaking. She says, so you know what it's like? It's common for people to have misconceptions about a place or people they're not familiar with. The professor's words made Anita think about something she was ashamed to admit. She says, I'm a hypocrite. I guess I'm guilty of the same thing. She said, I spewed out similar sentiments about America before I moved here. although a lot of her biases remained, there was also so much Anita was learning about life in this country that she had all wrong. And then the professor says, no country is perfect, I'll tell you that much, but every country is more than its sins. So I love that. So, when you're thinking about biases of a certain country, there's biases against America too, is, just remember that a country is more than its sins. And so, Melanie goes to Colombia with her mom in the book, and I love how you wrote in the book about all the wonderful things in Colombia. And so I really enjoyed that. So is there anything you'd like to say about that as well?
Yeah, no, all of that is actually really true to my mother's experience. She did have all of those experiences when she was growing up in Colombia. She did have a hatred for America, and she had a lot of ill will towards America, and she reluctantly came. She really didn't want to come to America, but she felt like she was out of options. She felt like there was nothing else left for her. She needed to find a different life. And again, all of what Anita experiences in the book when she's in America after living there for a little while. Yes, it was extremely hard to be a new immigrant in the United States and not speak English and not have any money and not even be a legal immigrant, a documented immigrant. So it was incredibly hard for her. But at the same time, she was realizing that with some hard work, she was making a life for herself. She was, growing in many areas. And she had her children and got married. And she was able to prosper in a way that she doesn't believe would have been possible in her country. So, yes, there's still lots of quote unquote sins, in America.
Yeah.
Mom today, she still lives here, and while deep down inside of her she wishes nothing more than to live in Colombia again, she is very grateful for this country because she feels that it has given her and her children, my mother had 3 children here, have all prospered and have all had so many opportunities. So yes, I would encourage people to kind of think that through about how do we see other people from other countries, what biases do we have, and what is it really like to be someone that's from there. So yeah, that was a great passage that you read.
Yeah. And there's another passage that goes along with, the opportunities that, moving to America, Melanie's mom gave her. And it was a passage from page 243. And it says, she says, Melanie's talking about, they're about to leave Colombia and there's a lady selling things on the road. And she says, that could have been me, destined to sell fruit at an intersection the rest of my life. No college, no job as a writer, no apartment in Miami. Where would I be if my mother had never left? Where would my family be? My grandmother, would she even be alive? The little bit of money her mother and aunts earned in America had been more than enough to change her family tree. Yeah. So it completely changed her life. Yeah. So it's a big thing for immigrants to leave their country and start a new life here. And so why do you think the United States, as a country, why do they struggle with immigrants and with cultural competence and understanding the immigrant experience?
That is such a good question.
I'm like, hey, everybody should read this book.
I wish I knew the perfect answer to that question, but at the end of the day, I think, this is a country of immigrants, we're all immigrants, no matter how many generations of your family has lived in America, they were immigrants at some point. And so that's a beautiful thing because that means that there's such diversity in this country, unlike you see in other countries, you don't diversity in a place like, there's cultural diversity in a place like Colombia, but it's a different kind of diversity here where people speak completely different languages, come from different parts of the world. The cultural differences are huge. And so I think, unfortunately, that's just kind of part of the human experience where when you're unfamiliar with something, when something is different, you're a little nervous about it. You're a little like, well, what is that? Or why do you do it that way? Or why do you eat that? Or why do you, talk that way? Or why are you always late? People would say, or why are you so loud, as people would say about my family? And so we're just a country of such diversities. There's such different people here. And so it can be a little bit, you've got to get out of your comfort zone in order to understand even a little bit, and I think that's what this book is about, like getting out of your comfort zone, learning more about what makes you uncomfortable, and then thinking through like, okay, why does that make me uncomfortable? Or what did I used to believe that now I am maybe questioning? So, I mean, yeah, I think there's a struggle here in this country because of that, because people are so different from one another, and you're sometimes nervous to ask about it or learn about it. You don't want to offend anyone. So there's a lot of reasons, but I hope that stories like this one can kind of make people feel more comfortable to explore, to get uncomfortable, to ask questions, to meet people, and not be like nervous.
And understand. Yeah. So my recommendation is read books like this, and American Immigrants, and educate yourselves. Like I said, get out of your box and just ask questions. Be curious about people. And so I know you mentioned you're working on another book, so we're anxious. So hopefully that will be complete. We can invite you to be a guest next year. But what other projects that are you currently working on? I know you have a wonderful blog. I read some of those things, and so there's some great recipes, or some great foods that are made in this book. And so I know you have recipes to those on your blog. So if your mouth is watering as you're reading the book, go check out Johanna's vlog and you can get the recipes. But what besides the other book and the blog, what other projects are you working on?
Yeah, I'm always writing. So I am a busy mom, and I spend most of my days with my two small children. But I do try to write as often as I can. I love working on my blog, and I knew that when I wrote this book, I was going to have to create some kind of recipe guide, some kind of recipe book. And on my website, like I was like, that's a no-brainer. There's way too much food in this book to not have recipes for people. I also have like in that package, which with the recipes, there are some dinner discussion questions that I think could be really cool for someone to take to a family dinner and kind of help them start the conversation with their parents, their grandparents, their siblings, because again, siblings experience life differently. So your sister or brother is going to have a different perception of your upbringing than you did. So that's really important. There's a playlist as well. I am really the other thing I'm working on is this next book. So I'm excited about this project, and the protagonist once again will be a Latino woman, because that's just what I know. That's who I am, and I will probably always have a protagonist who's a Latina woman because it's super fun to write. I love writing the parents, Spanish, and you're going to see that again, and you're going to see different cultures in this book, which I'm really excited about. There's a neighbor.
Oh, good.
There's a husband who's white. Then there's the Latina protagonist. So I'm just excited to bring together these friendships and explore, what that is like in America today, and also to bring a story to Nashville. I'm really excited to talk about, a different part of Nashville that maybe a lot of books don't talk about, which I'm excited about. So that and my blog, which I try to keep up to date, I write blogs every month because it's just fun to do that for me. That's really all I'm working on, and I think that's more than enough for my plate.
Well, a recipe book, you might stick that on your list. That would be a great thing to do. Recipe book from Foods from Colombia.
Yes.
Well, we love, as you know, reading at PBALC. We think reading is a great way to increase your literacy, obviously. What we always ask authors, what are you currently reading, and give us some recommendations.
Yeah. Right now my goal is to read a book a week, and so I'm always reading fiction, but I love to read nonfiction too. I love to read about growth and things like that. So right now I am reading a book called The Midnight Library. It's fiction, and it's about a woman who is about to pass away, but then she gets the opportunity to see what her life would be like in different versions of her life. She gets to see different versions of her life, so it's super interesting. Now, I'm still pretty much in the beginning, so I can't say whether or not I'm loving it yet. But I did just finish another book called The Comfort Crisis. That's a nonfiction book, kind of what we've been talking about, the importance of getting out of your comfort zone and how that really affects that person. So that was a really interesting read. But yeah, I'm always reading like a fiction and sometimes listening in audio to a nonfiction book while I work around the house. But let's see, some good fiction I've read recently. Oh, a great book I read recently was The Frozen River by Ariel Lawson.
Okay.
It's a big book, which I'm normally intimidated by big books, but this is a fabulous story. So I'd highly recommend that. And then another great book I've read recently was The Secret Book of Flora Lee. So that was just a unique
Okay.
story. Also kind of a bigger book, but so beautifully written that I highly recommend that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the recommendations. And if people want to know more about you, how can they find you? We'll post all the links on the comments after the live stream as well.
Yes, you can go to my website, johannavann.com. Van is spelled with 2 N's. On my website, you can download the first 2 chapters for free, or you can find that recipe book with the questions and the playlist for free. All of that is available there. And then I'm on social media at Johanna R. Vann on Instagram and Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, want to thank you again, Johanna, for joining us. This was a wonderful time to spend and talking about your book. Loved your book, by the way. So make sure and you check out Johanna on social media and check out her blog. It's very, very interesting in trying to make some of those recipes as well. Like I said, her book can be bought at any major bookstore, Amazon, or local independent bookstore as well. So make sure and add that to your reading list along with the other recommendations that Johanna gave us. And also this year, we added a new thing to our author live streams. We're going to be at the end of the year, we're going to be giving away a bundle of books from all of our featured author live streams. So this will include Johanna's book. So make sure and log in to all of our author live streams and log in next week or actually our next author live stream will be in March, but we'll log in March for our next author live streams. And thank you everyone for watching. And thank you, Johanna, for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
Stay warm, everybody. It's cold out there. We'll see y'all next time.